Hey everybody, and welcome to DnD Horror Stories with DnD Doge, where a dog reads you RPG horror stories from Reddit. What happens when someone suspects that a player is cheating in a game of Dungeons & Dragons, so they decide to confront them? Let's find out, shall we? To the story. Cheating Cleric gets called out. Rage quits. By Reddit user, Not Your Horny Bard. I've been thinking about posting this story for a while, and another a-hole player encounter, plus a recent heavy dose of Den of the Drake, Crit Crab, and D&D Doge. Hey, I know that guy. He's me. Have encouraged me to finally write it all down. Not much of a social media guy, so please excuse any mistakes. TLDR at the end. Here are the characters. Me, an Archfey Warlock, respect to Lore Bard for reasons. Autistic ADHD, and sometimes DM. DM, relatively new at DMing when this story happened. Also neurodivergent. Artificer, Battlesmith I think. Started as a fighter, but ended up with a new character. Also a more experienced DM. Sorcerer, a Shadow Sorcerer / Grave Cleric. Newbie player, but doesn't have much to do with the story. Rogue, Mastermind Rogue / Old One Warlock, Sorcerer's little brother, also doesn't have much to do with the story. And Cleric, the problem player. This story is about a D&D group I joined almost 6 years ago, the first long-running group I ever joined. I was looking to get back into D&D after a couple one-shots back in high school, and Roll20 seemed like the perfect way to do that. I joined the group the DM had advertised, along with Artificer, and a revolving door of other players, eventually settling into the core group of me, Artificer, Sorcerer, and Rogue. The game was Tales from the Yawning Portal, heavily spiced up with homebrew. Things were looking great. After a while though, I got that 7-month itch, aided by a lucky / unlucky draw from the deck of many things that put me 4 levels above the rest of the party, and decided to leave for a while to look for greener pastures and new games. We had a farewell session, where my character's warlock patron tried to force him to kill the rest of the party, okaying it with everyone else above table of course. And he ended up patronless and powerless, traveling with a pair of NPC bards to learn how to become one. Meanwhile, I hopped from game to game, getting to try out new characters, and gaining plenty of gaming experience along the way. Eventually though, I missed my old group, and asked DM to come back. Enter Cleric. Though, why leave the core group to begin with? I mean, I can understand not wanting your character to be overpowered compared to the other players, and coming up with a way to retire the character was creative. But why not just make a new character and stick with a group that you were jiving with, while trying other games on the side? I don't know, I guess I just think differently. But anyways, I digress. While my character was going to Bard School, they needed someone to fill my spot. That someone was Cleric. Notice I haven't mentioned his character build. He was playing a female Kalishtar Destruction Domain Cleric. Basically your classic edgy goth girl. I don't think he ever actually told me his character backstory, but you can guess. Oh so tragic, with a huge bonus to damaging spells, at the cost of no healing magic, except with a healing item, which, of course, his character had. I'm going to be honest, he gave me bad vibes from the start. His habit of turning on facecam to show us his live reactions was a little weird, since our group had traditionally been voice only. But I tried to give him a chance. Maybe he would become a friend over time. Wrong. I was very wrong. Well, I don't think a player wanting to play with cams on is that weird. In fact, that is the way I prefer to play when playing online. It just makes the game feel more personable, almost like playing in person. But again, that's just me. Things started going downhill during our Halloween one-shot. I asked to run a special spooky one-shot since I wanted to try DMing, and the group agreed. I wrote a story about a death cult tasked with breaking into a temple of Pelor to retrieve an artifact of their god. Level 15 characters, no homebrew or unearthed arcana. I didn't trust myself to spot something unbalanced or iffy yet. This is foreshadowing. So Cleric gives me a Gloomstalker Assassin multiclass. I look it over and don't see anything weird other than the stats, which are a bit high, but within reason. Everything seemed great. The game goes awesome until the final battle against a homebrew paladin beholder called a Beholder. Okay, I have to admit, that is pretty funny and creative. Cleric opens up with 5 attacks in a single turn, with a sneak attack on all of them. That is a lot of attacks, and even if he did get that many, if I'm not mistaken, you can only have 1 sneak attack per turn. I call BS, and things get shouty fast. Cleric gets pissed that I didn't say anything earlier, and says that the rules support what he's doing. No, they don't. I didn't notice because I had created enough content that the one-shot was split up over 2 sessions, and the stress of running the first session had kept my mind off the rules until afterward. In the second session, I was more relaxed, so I noticed. He couldn't produce the rules he mentioned, so he gets mad. DM breaks up the argument, and we agree on not retconning anything, but from now on, he was only allowed 4 attacks in the first round, and 3 on every subsequent round. Cleric grudgingly agrees. That was when I started to get suspicious. As anyone would. The crux of the story came a month later, during a regular session. We were supposed to break into a nobleman's house to find out why he was hoarding all of the city's magic items. As the stealthiest in the group, Rogue and I sneak in, with my broom flying, and start snooping. We end up waking up the noble, who turns out to be a lot more powerful and a lot less humanoid than we thought. Our DM was a big Eldritch Horror fan. We decide to call for backup. Cleric drops in like a nuclear bomb, unleashing 2 AoE 6th level spells, and using his channel divinity to double the damage on each. The second one would have outright killed Rogue and I, if not for the DM intervening with an "Are you sure about that?" and convincing Cleric not to do it. We end up defeating the monster and getting plenty of sweet loot, but something was bothering me. After the session, fueled for a late night need for answers, I opened up my computer and started my research. I checked my work, I took screenshots, I posted my findings on the group Discord, and went to sleep satisfied. I then woke up to a shit show. Most of this story is vague, subject to my admittedly not great memory, though this at least I have proof for. Receipts, people. The transcript is as follows. Me, pinging Cleric. Okay, sorry to be a rules lawyer again, but I called BS on all the damage you were doing with that wave of obliteration. First off, that's a 5th level spell, and despite the fact that it's a domain spell, level 9 clerics only get 1 level 5 spell slot, so you only could have cast it once. Second, according to the only source I can find, it only does 8d8 thunder damage, not 8d8 thunder and 8d8 lightning damage. Plus, that channel divinity is for the wrong subclass. Tempest clerics can max out lightning and thunder damage. Destruction clerics get a different channel divinity called Sundering Invocation. If you can prove this, please show me. But I'm just saying this because your min-maxed OP builds are making this game a lot less fun. I inserted screenshots of the subclass in the spell. Also, how is your spell save DC 19? It should be 8 plus proficiency, which is a 4, plus your wisdom modifier. And unless you have a wisdom of 24, that's impossible at this level. The highest you should be able to get is a 17, unless you have some magic item that greatly increases your wisdom. DM: I have actually looked into this, and I will talk to him about this matter. At this point, Cleric direct messaged me. I did not respond, mainly because I was scared and guilty. I have some trauma related to confrontation, especially with people older than me, and Cleric was around twice my age at the time. I was 19, by the way. Cleric's direct message: if you want to try and call me out again, do so in a message. We aren't kids, and I told you that is what was homebrewed. I do not need to explain stuff to you, bud. Cleric in public chat: I have already expressed my concerns on the homebrewed subclass and asked for DM's thoughts. And if you have something to say, you should be an adult and send it to my private messages like I did to you. I even saw you pop on to see it and then not respond. Let's not do this again. I'm not going to say that I was 100% right here, and I ended up posting an "Am I the a-hole" about this at the time, and a fair few people called me a jerk over it, which sent me into a bit of a spiral. In my defense, I'm not great at social cues, and posted the original call out with 2 AM brain fog. But this story isn't about justifying me. It just turns out that I was a lot more right than I thought. Yeah, I would say that posting this confrontation in the general chat of the Discord may not have been the best tactic. If anything, if OP had issues with Cleric's build and actions, he could have just said something to the Dungeon Master. But again, that's only my opinion. What do you guys think? DM private messages me the next day, asking me if Cleric said anything to me. I send him a screenshot of Cleric's message. He then asks me to come to a quick voice call with him and Artificer later to discuss the situation. At this point, my anxiety is through the roof. Am I in trouble? Am I going to get kicked? The meeting starts, and the DM dives right in with explanations. I'm not in trouble. He and Artificer have actually been keeping an eye on Cleric for a while. They actually intended to confront him soon, once they had gathered enough evidence, but my post had set things off a little early. The depths of what they'd already found were infuriating, but not surprising. Not only had Cleric been using the Unearthed Arcana version of Kalishtar, giving himself expertise in 2 skills, but he'd actively tampered with his sheet, giving himself too many spell slots, a few extra points in each stat, more expertise, more proficiency, and altering the back end of his sheet to add a few points to every roll. He'd also been hoarding loot, including several rings of charisma that Sorcerer and I really could have used. I was, for a lack of a better word, shook. DM told me to check if he'd been doing the same thing in my game, and yeah, he had. 1 to 4 bonus points in every skill and save. Now I wasn't just shook, I was pissed. I blocked Cleric to keep him from retaliating, and then DM and Artificer went to Cleric with an ultimatum. He could redo his character with only official materials, with no homebrew or unearthed arcana, and Artificer and I would be given access to his sheet to check it regularly for, quote, inconsistencies. Or he could make a new character with the same stipulations. Or he could leave the group. After he figured out who I was, after playing with me for 6 months, he'd never bothered to learn my real name. He opted to quit. I assume he thought that he'd managed to string DM and Artificer along, but I wasn't taking any of his crap. Now that I knew I was right, I wouldn't hesitate to post any little cheat he tried to pull. The Sorcerer and Rogue were offline for this whole thing, and it took a while for DM, Artificer, and I to explain the situation. Sorcerer was mainly pissed that DM had set us up for an impossible fight, but DM apologized and has improved. Which fight was that? The one with the Duke that was hoarding magic items? He ended up narrating Cleric's character getting smote by her god and becoming a pile of ashes, as well as the aforementioned hoarded items. And this story has a happy ending. I'm still part of this group today, and after the end of the old campaign, DM and I started taking turns DMing, running our own campaigns on alternate weeks. Hopefully, at least one of them ends up seeing this. And Cleric, if you're seeing this, how's this for getting publicly called out? TLDR, I messaged my group accusing our Cleric of cheating, and it turns out the cheating was worse than I thought, and Cleric rage quit because he didn't want me checking his work. Well, it seems like the Cleric had been pulling a fast one on the group for a while, and probably for the entire duration of the game, even before OP joined back up with the group. Now, was OP calling it out publicly to the rest of the group in the main Discord chat instead of going to the DM first the right call? I would have to disagree. But in the end, I can understand the ultimatum they gave to Cleric, but them saying that OP would be the one to look over Cleric's sheet for approval probably stung Cleric's already bruised ego, so he just decided to leave due to embarrassment. And overall, it is good to hear that OP and the group are still playing to this day, with OP even taking up a game of their own as a dungeon master. So here's hoping that their games continue, and without any more cheaters. Now before we move on, Luna would really appreciate it if you click the like button on this video. How could you refuse that, little angel? She does love her treats. But with that, let's move on to a post where a Dungeons & Dragons player just can't find the joy in their Dungeon Master's boring DMing style. To the story. Anyone ever deal with a fairly dull, boring game? By Reddit user, Level 7 Cannoneer. I love my DM, and appreciate the years of stories he's told us, but he has a tendency to suck the adventure out of the game due to his love for realism and distaste for tropes. It's never anything really bad, like some of the stories I read on r/rpghorrorstories, but it does feel like we're constantly cheated out of daring adventurous sequences that are classic to D&D. He has a big adherence to specific math, rules, and numbers. 1. If we ask to do something that we can obviously do, we absolutely have to describe when and how we do the action as accurately as possible. Quote, "Can I cast Featherfall before we hit the ground?" is not acceptable. We have to describe exactly how close to the ground we attempt to cast it, and calculate the exact timing. After finishing a dungeon, we have to manually walk out, one room at a time. No time skips or flash forwards. Everything has to be precise. Because of this, pacing is always a big problem in our games. 2. If the wording in a spell or ability has even a hint of vagueness, we always have to check 3 sources to make sure that what we want to do is legal. One player used a level 9 spell to create a gravity orb that pulls enemies and loose objects towards it, and we had to spend 15 minutes researching if it affects loose objects through walls, when in reality, it would have been best for the DM to just make a call and move the game along. The loose objects were not even important either, and he really doesn't seem to like classic tropes. 1. One time we did a sneaky heist mission, but someone failed a roll and a guard sounded the alarm. Now, in classic action movie fashion, this would trigger a chase sequence where the party has to hastily escape from the heist before the security or guards all bear down on our position as we run for our lives. But because that sort of thing, quote, only happens in movies, we instead usually just walk out of the enemy base. No opposition, no chase sequence, just some magical security doors that close on us that can simply be opened with a single Arcana check. He did a good job at avoiding a tired trope, but instead left us with a scenario filled with zero excitement. 2. Almost no puzzles. They're quote-unquote too gamey. What idiot would create a locked door that can only be opened via a riddle, right? Entirely unrealistic. So most dungeons tend to be straight hallways and the occasional monster in an empty room. But in my opinion, this is a game, and gamey stuff like riddles and puzzles are kind of the fun part of the genre. 3. Building up villains for months or years without a satisfying final confrontation. Sometimes we meet a bad guy, and there's build-up for months or years, and it feels like it's all culminating towards a final epic showdown. But because my DM tends to dislike predictable tropes, that final encounter never happens. We can spend 3 to 5 sessions climbing the evil wizard's tower, and when we finally reach the wizard, we will just end up standing in a room with him, talking to him, with no rolls, for like 30 minutes. And then he surrenders or teleports away, not even summoning a powerful minion to provide as a distraction for his getaway. And in my opinion, ending a years-long story like that without a satisfying release of all the tension that was built up, it just feels like a huge anticlimax. In cases where the bad guy escapes and leaves us, we have been told that we quote-unquote could have stopped him if we had a specific 9th level spell, even though our whole party are marshals and half-casters, making me feel like he's not even designing the plot around our capabilities. Not to mention, we all have cool level 20 abilities we would like to try out, but we never do because the biggest threats in the game that could challenge us just want to surrender without a fight. All of this comes from a well-meaning place to want to make sure that the game is as original as possible. But in the end, every session feels like it's crescendoing towards a hugely memorable session, only to peter out with a huge loss of momentum. I've stuck around for so long because the players sometimes are able to create scenarios that are a lot more exciting than the DM scenarios, leading to exciting, memorable sessions here and there. But recently, the players who are usually in charge of steering the sessions towards excitement have left our game, and now there's not much joy left. I think maybe the DM would prefer a different system that's focused more around narrative and less around gamey stuff. So I think I'm going to take the old advice of no D&D is better than bad D&D and call it quits after my final game. Can anyone else relate to having a boring game? Well, yeah. That sounds like some of the most boring nonsense I've read about in a D&D game. And that is the key word there, game. Like OP said, if the Dungeon Master wanted to basically write a story, I'm sure there are other tabletop RPGs out there that are more narrative focused. But even then, you got to allow your players to do cool stuff to make their characters feel like heroes, or anti-heroes if you're playing a more gray area campaign. But not allowing your players to fight things, solve puzzles, or even have a chase sequence because it would be too gamey is just absurd. OP even elaborated further in the comments that the chase sequence didn't happen because the guards just figured that they were no match for the party. And in the case of puzzles, the DM simply said, "This isn't Indiana Jones." It's a wonder how OP stayed in this game for so long. But I can understand, since they were all friends, and the other players making fun things happen through roleplay. So yeah, I think OP should go the no D&D is better than bad D&D route here. But before that, I would suggest just talking to the DM, and bringing up all the points OP made in this post. A good DM should be concerned about whether or not their players are having fun, while not preventing themselves from having fun as well. So if OP's DM is a good DM, he would likely listen to OP and maybe change things. I mean, I'm sure he would rather keep his players and just change his DMing style a little bit. That way, OP would not have to leave after the campaign is over. But those are just my thoughts. What would you suggest OP do here? Though, with that said, let's move on to a tale of a dungeon master taking all player autonomy away from a player's character, and trampling all over their backstory. To the post. The idea of my character died. If only the character died too. By Reddit user, Truthin. Before we begin, I would like to say that all people involved are my dear friends, and I do not wish for any hate towards the people involved. Well, here goes. The campaign was a 3-shot by a good friend of mine, and besides me, a life domain cleric, female elf, there were 3 more of my friends, whose classes and races are irrelevant to the story. In the first session, we arrived on an island and quickly figured out that we were in a dread domain of some sort that was ruled over by an evil king that once conquered the land for reasons yet unknown to us. Shortly after our arrival, we were ambushed by a group of wraiths, and me, being a cleric surrounded by undead creatures, I went with the good old combo of Spirit Guardians plus Turn Undead on later turns. My moments of glory did not last long, however, because on the second round, I was an unfortunate victim of a, later admitted, not so random, crit for far too much damage for me to be able to pass my concentration saving throw. I don't think it matters how much damage you receive. You should still be able to make a concentration save no matter what. The fight went on. I healed myself up from critical health and did the only logical thing. I cast Turn Undead. To my surprise, the majority of the mobs failed their save and were thus forced to run away from me. This, however, created a problem, as the DM had cooked up a story where this was not supposed to happen. The wraiths, that at this point were very far away, were quickly replaced by another pack of wraiths that, in just one turn, were all instantly killed by a shaman NPC appearing out of nowhere, and thus, quote-unquote, saving us. The adventure went on. We arrived in a village, were given several quests in order to find out more about the Dreadlord King, and a way into his castle where we had to defeat him in order to escape the Dread Domain. The next encounter had us fighting a boss whose abilities were heavily based around charming the players, and so I did the only logical thing, cast Calm Emotion on us, and thus granting us immunity to the status effect. Well, unless this was a homebrew rule, I don't think Calm Emotions gives immunity to being charmed. However, this was not supposed to happen. The DM, now at a loss on how to make the boss quote-unquote challenging, got mad at me for ruining his fight for the second time. The next session, I was feeling a little guilty, so I stuck to only healing spells and damaging cantrips. The DM would also tell me to save my spells for Remove Curse, as the spell was apparently needed for the next part of the story. The fights that session were brutal, especially one fight against the King's Son in an arena, where, essentially, every attack would block healing effects on the victim until the next turn. And also, this time, not a single Turn Undead would go through. The fight ended with all of us alive, in no small part thanks to the DM heavily and openly fudging rolls. The campaign went on, with several more fights, and at this point, I was promoted to the party heal bot. We fought some baddies, did some puzzle where I dared to cast divination, which resulted in the spell being banned. Anyway, back to being a heal bot. And we also had to make friends with a tribe of quote-unquote friendly ghouls, because that was how the story was supposed to go. Never mind me being a cleric of Kelemvor, because I was very clearly told that I had to leave the ghouls alive for the story. I kept my frustration mostly to myself, only asking the DM for no more anti-heal mechanics, since that was kind of all I had left at this point. But I was growing bored and sick of what my character had become. So eventually, we stormed the king's castle, fighting side by side with our ghoul allies, and finally meeting the king. We were then told that the king conquered the island for a magical water stream that would save his dying wife. The description of the long-dead queen was strangely familiar to how I described my own character, however, and thus my backstory was out the window. The king proclaimed me as a reincarnation of his dead wife, and I got a quick confirmation of this from Kelemvor, because I was trying to convince the king that I in fact was not, and that would go against the story. The king, angered that I would kill our son in the arena, still begged me to join him yet again in this life. We killed the king. However, with me being so frustrated, I simply browsed my phone for the majority of the fight, hoping that my character would die here, since for me, the idea of my character was already gone. However, the DM got upset at me a couple of times for not paying attention to the events of the story, specifically crafted for my character's development. In the end, I grew disgusted with my character and felt like I was simply DM's NPC to cast spells only when he needed me to, and to serve as an important part of DM's big reveal about the king's backstory. I never got to feel like a hero in the whole campaign, and between being reduced to the party's healbot and the unwanted addition to my backstory, all this simply killed my idea of the character. Edit. I really should have said that the DM of this story has not DM'd a campaign of this scale before. Also, the campaign is built in such a way where we rotate DMing every 3 to 4 sessions while keeping the same characters. This is a 4th episode of this campaign, meaning 3 of us already DM'd for these characters, and the characters are meant to continue in many more mini-campaigns to come. The reason why I stayed in the campaign is simply because I have fun playing alongside the DM of this story when he is a player character, and I did not intend on burning all the bridges because of one frustrating experience. I also did not want to discourage the DM completely, as he is very new to DMing, and I know for a fact he worked long and hard on this campaign. Yeah, that could be a little annoying, to have a character you created being co-opted to serve as an ends to a means for what the DM wanted to do, especially with the way this DM did it, as he basically told OP what their character could and could not do. Now, don't get me wrong, it is awesome when you leave a little bit of openness in your character's backstory to allow the DM to insert things in the game that will surprise you and your character. But as it sounded here, this DM did things that went completely against what OP already had in their backstory. This is why it's good in Session Zeros to discuss these type of things, like what you want your character to be, their motivations, and where you would like to see the character go within the confines of the overarching story. Though this could also be a case of too many cooks in the kitchen, as OP's group rotates DMs for the same characters. So my advice to OP would be to talk to the DM about that part, and let OP's grievances known. That way, they can figure out how to salvage OP's character in OP's eyes. Though, what would you suggest here? But that is all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you would like to help the channel out by leaving a tip, I'll post my Buy Me a Coffee and Ko-Fi links in the description. But as always, I appreciate all of you, and hope that your games remain horror story free. Until next time.